spans the whole conversation around what really affects the people of Pakistan, right? We are affected by the politics, right? And the contract with the people, right? We are affected by geopolitics, right? Where the global politics affects us. For example, if there was a war with Iran right now, oil prices would go up significantly, right? If there was a war between Israel and Iran, that would adversely affect Pakistan's economy because oil prices would go up dramatically and transform, affect our economic momentum. So I'm going to open up this conversation with to the panel, who are, well-established leaders thought leaders in driving conversations around politics and economics. So I'm going to open up the questions to all three of you. I'll start with Dr. Bengali. How do global political shifts influence economic policies and stability in countries like Pakistan?
Hello. Thank you. It's a great privilege to be here. Thank you, Beacon House. And if you are, there's a theater company that looks for actors, and you don't know anything about acting, you're not even part of the game. I think, unfortunately, and I was listening to the closing session of the last, and there was whether one has to be pessimistic or optimistic about AI. I'm afraid I have to start with a somewhat pessimistic note. We have reduced ourselves to a level where we are non-entities in the world affairs. Nobody takes us seriously. We are only takers. Whatever happens, we receive that. We don't influence anything. That is, whether it's technology, knowledge, the world is way ahead of us. We were still in the 20th century. In some large parts of the country, we are still in the 19th century. We churn out students who can't write their own name. So and we have, what do we have to contribute? When I was a student at the University of Karachi, 10% of the students were foreign students. Nobody comes now to Pakistan. Our universities have disintegrated. So I don't know, when we have nothing to contribute, we can only take what's happening outside. I think I don't know whether I should say this during this question or during the discussion. The foreign aid that we receive, we are beggars. We have this kashkol in our hand all the time. We go everywhere. And they determined what we should do. There was a 4-country summit meeting in Kuala Lumpur, Turkey, Iran, Malaysia, Pakistan, head of state meetings. And Saudi Arabia said Pakistan will not go, and we did not go. So that's where we stand. We have to put our house in order. We have to strengthen our economy. We have to strengthen our political morality to be taken seriously in the world and respected, and for us to be able to make any contribution in world affairs.
Lisa?
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay. First of all, Beacon House School System, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here among the teachers of the teaching community, students, and a very, very important school system in Pakistan. I'll try and address your question in a very AI way, if I may. I'll try to. I'm not sure I'll be as good as Zara, but I'll try to stick to the question. How do global power shifts influence economic policies and stability? Let me take you all back to the colonial project. This is where Pakistan was. And obviously, the colonial project was a global power project, and it was actually a power competition for resources and markets. And post-colonial world, sadly, as in the case of my own experience as a citizen of this country, and perhaps also as a politician, is that I see that post-colonial project is probably not over. It's very more like the colonial project. So there is still, you can see that there is a world competition over markets and resources. And as somebody who's moved from, I've had several lives. In my previous life, I was a journalist, and then I was an academic. And in the present life, I also had an opportunity to serve at the local level of politics, which is the face-to-face politics, and then at the national level. And this is my 16th year in the parliament. Also being associated with a political party, the People's Party, I have seen the highs and lows of Pakistan's politics. And in Pakistan's politics, I'll go for political rhetoric, not looking at what the actual situation may be different, but the political rhetoric of all that I have witnessed as a political worker or a student or a citizen, of regime changes, dismissals of prime ministers, executions, dictators, tin pot dictators coming and imposing a person-centric law. The political rhetoric, there are several dimensions, but there's a very big dimension which rotates around the global project. So let's start with like now. Now the position is that one big political party is looking up to the elections in the US and is waiting with bated breath कि कौन होगा सदर और फिर हमारे leader को जेल से निकलवा देगा. So that is the kind of importance that even politicians here attribute to global powers, which may or may not be a fact. Let's move back in our own, my own leader, Shahid Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. There's, one document after another and a lot of sort of oral narrative around it about how he defied, by building a bomb, he perhaps annoyed the global powers. And then this quote, we will make a horrible example of you, and then the execution follows. So I don't know if it's a fact or not, but the political rhetoric goes around that. And similarly, we've had, if you look at Pakistan's security situation, in our neighborhood, we've had like nearly a 4-decade war in Afghanistan. The security situation is in Balochistan, the security situation in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and then, so all these, again, the global powers are implicated in that. But what my main argument here will be that perhaps, right now, the ironic part is that last year, 2 years back, the regime change that took place, again, a populist, Imran Khan, who's a populist leader, came up waving a cipher in hand, and he talked about the US. And so the argument is it something that politicians do strategically for the populist narrative to keep implicating the global powers, कि हाँ उन्होंने मुझे निकाला है, so regroup and become a popular leader again, and not looking back at what your weakness could be as a regime? Or is it actually the fact that the global race and the global competition is something that often sways politics here and there? And this is a question I leave it to you and also for the discussion. So if I'll stop here.
Ali Raza.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you very much, Zamindar sir. Well, I think the fundamental question is that who holds the power? What is global power? I think it's the corporate. So if we go over this very interesting book, which I happened to read once, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, if we go over that and we realize that it is the corporates who essentially dictate the terms, and they are the ones who bring in that power, and majority of the developing countries end up signing agreements which are essentially, empowering those corporates and not their local industries. So I think the fundamental question is that why do we have to sign those agreements? Why aren't we empowering our own indigenous industries and indigenous people? So I think the biggest problem we face is that we end up getting those dictates, and it's always a donor-driven agenda that we end up following, which creates all the mess. I totally agree with Bengali sir that we essentially have driven ourselves to this point. But the fact remains that I think the governments are not supposed to be in the business. They need to create this conducive environment for the investments to come, be it our indigenous investments or be it investments coming from abroad. So I think that's really what we need to do, and that's unfortunately, till we have this dependence on these different multilateral, bilateral donors, we will not be able to get out of this rigmarole. So I think that's really what I feel that we need to do.
So given that we live in a very, we're in a difficult situation, right? The world is not interested in us. We're in the middle of, even in the AI world, right? For example, Pakistan cannot import GPUs, which are the AI processors required to build AI capability within Pakistan. So, for example, we're one of the countries which is banned by the United States to import this. China is there, so the war between China and US has really opened up, and Pakistan sits somewhere in between. Where do you see this whole game? Because the world is, the global system is integrated. Pakistan is not very well integrated into the global system right now. Our brand Pakistan has weakened. So the capacity of our people, like there was a report recently that the Pakistani computers manpower gets one of the lowest wage per hour in the world right now, right? So that means the brand Pakistan is so depreciated that it's not able to garner reasonable earnings, or even the capability set is maybe at a lower stage. What needs to happen for us to be able to engage with the world in a meaningful way? And we can take it off with Mr. Bengali.
Pakistan is a resource-rich country. We are resource to, on a per capita basis, resource to man, we are far richer than India is. We have the capacity to reduce unemployment and poverty to less than 5% in 20 years. And I'm making this statement not as a slogan, but in my professional capacity with full responsibility. We can get every child into school in 5 years' time. It's doable. So with all those possibilities, why are we in this stage? The fact is, I repeat and I extend what Ali Raza Saab said, we are run by a coterie of vested interests from the very beginning. They make policy. And over the last 20, 25 years, I have been able to see this very clearly, who makes policy and what for. Take the power crisis, for example. For the consumer, the power crisis is load shedding and high cost. But there's another power crisis now for the government in terms of paying capacity payments, which has become the biggest drain on our budget, bigger than even defense, bigger than even debt servicing. This has not come about accidentally. My organization, in writing, in research, on television, in public speeches, in meetings with government, on government bodies, we have been warning that this is a disastrous route to take, and yet it was taken. Because there was a lobby that was interested in making money out of it. We have the sugar industry, which is bleeding the country. We have the fertilizer industry, which is bleeding the country. We have textiles. We have the stock market bleeding the country, the property market bleeding the country, and lastly, I must not forget the military-industrial complex. They are also bleeding the country. So when policies are made for these specific interests at the cost of national interest, and I am making this statement with full responsibility, this is where we will end up.
How does this change? That's
yeah,
the question.
This has to change because public opinion has to assert itself. The problem with Pakistan is, and that is a problem of which all of us, including myself, everyone in this country who can speak English in particular, is that we have created two Pakistans. There is the Pakistan of the Ashrafia and the Pakistan of the Awam, the rich and the poor, the elite and the masses. We belong to the Ashrafia. We have created separate housing areas for ourselves. We have created separate educational institutions for ourselves. Beacon Housing is one of them. I teach in Zabis, that's another one of them. Hospitals, everything else. And we are very content with that. We are very content with our part of Pakistan. We are wealthy enough to buy our own water, put up our own generators for electricity and now solar panels. We even buy our own security. We have ignored the rest of Pakistan. So the elite has to wake up. The elite has to become less selfish, have a national agenda rather than a personalized agenda. I teach students, these are all students, I teach in this elite institution. They are all students who come from elite areas, Defense Clifton. They don't know what Sher Shah is like. They didn't know where was Guru Mandir. They'd never been there. So we have created a cocoon for ourselves, and we think that the cocoon will survive. You know, we are on a ship on first-class cabins, and when there is turbulence, we pull out bolts and nuts from the ship to strengthen our cabin, not realizing that when the ship sinks, we will all sink. So I think what we need to do is for the elite to wake up.
What needs to change? Yeah. Well, I think first of all, as I said, my own experience, at that multiple levels is that I see that any government who comes, however it comes, is sort of haunted by the specters of its going away. So these hasty decision-making is often because of the way politics has played out in Pakistan with a very powerful establishment. Initially, there was, of course, judiciary and establishment would get together and oust elected governments. We saw this in the 90s. Lately, we've seen 2 prime ministers being shown the door by a very activist judiciary. So for me, the first desire, before we can even begin to set our policy course in the right direction, is to strive towards political stability. If we do not have political stability, what we see at the top will be not Parliament sort of legislating on compulsory education, access to health, right to livelihood. We should be legislating on these issues. But what is our agenda? Our agenda is how do we ensure that the structure of the state is such that the different organs don't destabilize each other. And so it's always a power wrangle. Every government is in a survival mode. And so I think going forward, we have to work towards political stability. And how do we do that? I think at some stage, the political parties, well, previously the norm was every party that was in opposition or outside the elections was bent upon destabilizing the government. That has to stop. I think the parties have to at least agree, which we did in the Charter of Democracy, and unfortunately, again, the the third force came in and started destabilizing the existing structure. So I think we have to have perhaps a new agreement among the political parties on how we ensure that we have some semblance of political stability and the democratic project continues, and the balance of the different state organs also. And I don't know if that is too idealistic in the present context, but as a political worker, I feel that that will precede the discussions that, you know, about, I think the civilian supremacy will come once we have this political stability, the parties agreeing with each other, and then deciding on some ground rules.
So the question remains, right? How do we, I mean, this has been the status quo for a while, right? We've been, for the last 75 years, been on a downward slide rather than upward slide towards really evolving a democracy where the people's voice is heard and people are truly represented. This schism between the elites and the masses has existed for the longest time. It's gotten worse. And in the age of AI, it's going to even get worse because the haves and have-nots will be defined by access to, say, computing power, access to a smartphone. And how does this all change? And again, I open it up to you because you are a politician. You represent the voice of the people. How do you envision this shift to happen?
The shift to AI? Or
the shift to a more representative democracy where the will of the people is heard and where the elite capture is kind of balanced out with the welfare of the masses, which is not happening, right?
I'll repeat that I think, you see, we need, obviously it's very important to have free and fair elections. So let me look at the watershed moment in Pakistan's history. Since 2008 till now, perhaps this is the longest period, which is not to say much, it's the longest period when we really haven't had a military interruption, or we have had constitutional crises even within this time, but we haven't had a full-scale military intervention. So I think which is a silver lining. So we're still officially a democracy. We may have our different points of view as to what the quality of democracy is. Is it tailored? Is it managed? Is it, controlled and so on? But it is still a democracy. And we have to strive towards civilian supremacy and rule of law and perhaps, following the constitution. That is when we will really empower our people. And that is what I see as the way forward, even before the kind of, because the problem is that we haven't really had, our policy making and decision making has always been broken because of this political wrangling. So again, I think at some stage, all political parties, if there are some parties who they feel that they are being pushed towards the wall, I don't want to comment on all that, but I think at one level, political parties are best at coming together and doing national consensus on certain issues. So I think that all the parties will have to work towards, an agenda to move this country forward. Until and unless the solution, and you began, Naeem, you began this conversation by saying politics trumps economics, and we all know that. So I think if politics trumps economics, it's important that we look for solutions to the present impasse within politics, and the parties come together for national interest and move this country forward. I don't know if I'm speaking again in general terms. But.
So, Mr. Bengali, how do you feel this shift will happen, right? I mean, you're an educationist, you're seeing this from a very different perspective. Where will the change come from?
Well, I would say that the change would come from within. We have to come up with self-sustained solutions. I think we've got a prime example in Salport where the community got together and ended up, taking the responsibility of the government. I think that's the kind of thing we need to do. There was a report published by Pakistan Center for Philanthropy in 2000, I guess, which said that overall philanthropy in Pakistan giving is more than 70 billion. but it's obviously not documented the way we would want to document. So I think in terms of the fact that people have the will, and we've seen when and if there's a crisis in Pakistan, everybody comes out and starts to contribute. So there is definitely a national cohesion. There is a lot of national spirit. I think I totally endorse what Nafisa is saying, that the leadership has to get less polarized. They need to get together and think a little long term for the betterment of the country. I think that's the way forward for us.
May I add to this? You know, if I have a nail in my shoe, I will limp. You can give me all kinds of painkillers and medicines to get my limb, but all you have to do is remove the nail. The nail in that shoe of this, the political society, is military interference. Remove that, and things will begin to happen. I've had a chance to work with Mohtarama Benazir Bhutto. The first term, there was something she asked me to do. I produced that, gave it to her. It was lying on her table. And one day she said, you know, every day I come to the office, I want to take that up because it was important to her. She asked me to prepare it. But every day I come, there's a new crisis waiting for me. And there is an ex-ISI chief, retired, who gave in an interview later on, who actually said, we created a crisis every day so that they cannot function. No government can function. Nafisa, you talked about political parties coming to an agreement. You missed out the most important political party that operates from Rawalpindi. Without them, there can be no consensus. I was a member of the National Finance Commission, which gave an award after more than 20 years of recrimination. We met for 4 delegations from the provinces, 1 from the Federation. We met for 5 months, 16 meetings, and we arrived at a consensus. And in those 5 months, there was never any acrimony. Nobody accused anybody of anything. Nobody showed eyes. It was very cordial. And we came to an agreement. Leave the public representatives on their own. We will come to an agreement. So I think that's the key. Get out of our hair.
Hello. We have the examples of Indonesia and Turkey, where the establishment played a very major role because of just the security situation and the dynamics at that time. But there was an evolution, both Indonesia and Turkey, where they've actually been able to have that transition very peacefully and thoughtfully, and where the economies are now growing in a robust manner, the civil society is grown in a robust manner, and the social contract with the people is being fulfilled or making sure that they're moving in the right direction. How can that be achieved in Pakistan? And we can start with Nafisa, and I would love 3 of you to give your points of view.
You see, I would be the first one to say, yes, it is the military establishment that is the problem. If it was General Zia's, military dictatorship, or if it was General Musharraf, if the generals were in power, I think what you are saying, I would be the first one to endorse it, that yes, it is the military establishment that is the problem. But presently we are in a democratic government, and the responsibility, whether we like it or not, falls on the shoulders of politicians. And the way we do politics now has to change. I think the Maula Jat style of politics, where one party will come out and do a dharna, and I'm taking you back to 2014, and it would say, no, my way or highway, and this government has to go and come what may. That kind of politics, the populist politics, there was a question there which we were going to discuss on, the populism in politics creates divisions. So we are a very divided country because of the way we've been doing politics. The way we do politics also has to change. Today, Pakistan is ideologically, geographically, and in so many ways we're a broken country. Look at the incidents like the Mirpur Khas incidents, where we have actually the mobs taking over. Half of our country is in the spate of insurgency. I think the political leaderships across parties has to rise up to the challenge and accept responsibility. If I say no, I will be the first person to say, to have a victim syndrome as far as the military establishment goes, because my father went into jail. We had been underground, so we faced General Zia's martial law, we faced General Musharraf, and my leader, of course, Shaheed Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto. Our party has gone through a long struggle. But I think it's the politicians that have to rise to the occasion. And if we really want to push back the military, we have to empower the people and talk about civilian supremacy. And the way we do, then politics has to change. We have to at least keep negotiating, and the parties have to talk, even though we may not like the opposition, even though the opposition may not like us, we have to talk across. And that is something that we've always, at least in my party, there is this thing called the democratic patience, where we, talk about a minimum agenda and sort of reinforce the agenda of the people, strengthen the parliament. One way forward would be to ensure that the parliament is open to the people, and it is the parliament that is supreme. It is the parliament that plays the oversight role. We also don't want too much power with the executive. And I was just looking at this, the PIA privatization drama that took place the other day. It was totally, fraudulent. But if we have, I'm going to raise it in the parliament. The parliament has to have that agency of oversight. And if we have that, then perhaps we will not have an activist judiciary which is, after the executive all the time, or is appropriating executive power. So I think at some level, the politicians across party divide have to rise to the challenge and not, subsume themselves and wait for establishment's endorsement. I think and I think the politicians there is no other way out. We have to rise to it. This is what, as you said, the Indonesians decided. One day they woke up and they said, well, we'll come together and we will ensure that we have these free and fair elections and whatever else the issues were. Turkey did it, and I'm sure Pakistan can do it. But I think it's everybody, including our leader in jail, he also has to come on board. And you can't say कि भाई मैं फौजियों से बात करूँगा और इससे बात नहीं करूँगा और ये करप्ट हैं और ये हैं वो हैं.
Kaisar?
See, every country has its own trajectory. What helped Turkey put their military in the box was their desire to join the European Union, which is still there. And in order to do that, they had to bring in a lot of changes in terms of European standards, human rights, and democracy, and free elections, and everything else. They had to do it. They did it because they wanted to join the European Union, and that application is still pending. Indonesia was different. Indonesia was on the verge of becoming a communist country under Sukarno. It was the largest communist party in the world at that time in terms of membership. And the United States undertook a very covert operation to destroy that party. And what the United States helped build afterwards was a democracy, because without that, it would have slumped back into a situation where the Communist Party would have revived the United States. If I may take 1 minute to say that all the social welfare structures of European states came after 1919. 1917 was the Bolshevik Revolution. France and England launched a counter-revolution, which is called the White Revolution. which failed, and the Soviets consolidated their power, and Western Europe was afraid that the communist parties in our countries, there were very strong communist parties in all these countries, would triumph. So they thought, well, we have to give something to the people. And it is very interesting that the ILO was formed in 1920, immediately after the failure of the White Revolution. And then came all the legislation. You can go and check. All the welfare legislation in European countries came after 1920. The United States has never had, if the communist revolution in Afghanistan had succeeded, the United States would have made sure that socio-political changes take place in Pakistan so that we don't go communist. Instead, that didn't happen. So all the traditional power structures in Pakistan, whether it's the feudals, whether it's the robber baron industrialists, whether it's the generals, the United States has consolidated that because they use Pakistan for their dirty jobs anywhere else or abroad. Your earlier question was relationship to the external world. So this is where Pakistan is. From British colonialism, we have merely moved into cantonment colonialism, where all the traditional power structures, even at the village level, continues to exist. Nothing has changed.
So where do you see the hope, the opportunity for change?
For this audience to rise, to become alert. When we were students, when I was a student in the 1970s, we didn't have internet or anything. We didn't even have laptops or computers. We were very active. We had our own political party, which was called the Liberals. We would collect some money, 1 rupee here, 4 annas there. We would go to Burns Road because that's where all the printing industry was. We would get a few pamphlets printed, sometimes 100, sometimes 200, depending on how much money we have. Then we would stand at Regal Cinema and distribute those pamphlets. We even protested against the Vietnam War, jiska hamara koi ताल्लुक नहीं था. Today's generation of students don't protest about anything. And all they have to do is open their laptop, pick up their mouse, and give their opinion. That's what all of you can do. Make sure you are heard. Let there be 1 million voices to protest whatever matters to you. As long as we are apathetic, we don't care what happens outside our own bungalows in Defense and Clifton, then nothing will happen. So the biggest problem in this country is the apathy of the elite. We have to rise.
Ali Raza, how do you think that will change? Where do you see the hope?
No, well, I'm an optimist, so I still feel that there are these a lot of success stories which go on, and there are a lot of, say for example, NGOs. They're doing amazing work, starting off from microfinancing to education. I mean, there are a lot of these success stories we have, and I believe that, if we are able to develop that consensus. My question actually I wanted to ask Dr. Nafisa was that since we have kind of evolved, are we evolving in the right direction or not? Because I am somebody who still believes that instead of blatant martial laws, now they are essentially somewhere at the back end. So the question is that are we in the right direction of this evolution or not? So I believe that yes, we are. Maybe Dr. Bengali can comment on this, and Dr. Nafisa.
Yeah, before that, I, again taking forward Kesar's, what needs to be done, and you said people have to rise. I think that implies that you have to, have that confrontationist mode. We've done that. As a political worker, we've done that. It doesn't really work. I think what is important to have a moral compass around which you rally, and unfortunately, because of this whole populist agenda, people are rallying around a person and not principles. And I think that we have to look at, for me, I draw strength in constitution. So the constitution of Pakistan is what our moral compass should be, and not, a particular persona that we emulate or want, that our entire moral world is around that particular persona, which is what, and of course I'm hinting at Imran Khan right now, that, a lot of people in Pakistan thinks that he is the end-all and be-all of leadership, the kind of words that I see even in the social media. And I think that there has to be a dispassionate, look at, and see it in a perspective, and perhaps make, where there are violations of constitution, whether our government does it or anybody from the opposition, this is where the protest or the rising up has to be on the constitution. That is where the citizens, I think, or the civil rights issues come up. The other thing that I think, why I think the way politics needs to change is, until Benazir Bhutto, the voters were not voting on parochial lines, or there wasn't a provincial context. Unfortunately, now in politics, it's become so divisive, and I think really we need to come together around that issue, that we have to have a whole of Pakistan approach. We have to have a whole of Pakistan approach. We cannot, because if something happens, say in my district, Khairpur was underwater for how many, 2 months because of the floods, and half of Khairpur came out and sought refuge in Karachi. So the urban collapse is because of uneven approaches to development, even with the resources. I mean, Kaisar is an expert, and he would bear me out that the way NFC is being distributed, even now at the federal level, is skewed against smaller provinces. It's skewed against women, it's skewed against minorities. So we have to have that, whole of Pakistan approach when we are looking at, and this is something that I also say on the floor of the House. So the way politics, the politics has to change, and I think the citizens have to look at principles in the Constitution and not personas. People will come and go, but the Constitution will remain.
So what I'm hearing from this esteemed panel is that clearly we need to awaken the people of Pakistan, right, to their rights, to their responsibilities. We need to educate our people. That has to be the primary way forward.
We have to be awake. I think the people are awake.
No, but
I personally think, I look at my voters and I think people are a step ahead of where we are.
Sure. And this is where I feel that the technology revolution, the AI revolution will play a big role in terms of empowering people and leveraging. Already the communication revolution has empowered people in ways that we've never seen before. The dynamics of politics have changed dramatically, and they're changing very fast. And power will also shift now, because from these robber barons, like you mentioned, or elite capture, the empowerment of individuals will shift power. It's happened in other economies. In India, it's starting to happen in other economies as well. I think that's where the real opportunity lies. With that note, I'm just going to make sure that we have time for questions. The first question is for Mr. Bengali. How can Pakistan leverage its economic strengths to attract global investors in an increasingly competitive landscape?
Any business, whether it's national, international, local, it depends on the key is sanctity of contracts. If I am running a small shop in a village and I buy some goods on credit from the city, I am under obligation to pay on time and whatever the conditions were. If I don't, I've broken my contract. I can't do business. Pakistan is singularly notorious in the world today for breaking contracts. We broke the contract with Ricodic. We are in the process of breaking contracts today, as we speak, in terms of forcing revisions of contracts with IPPs. The fact that there are no bidders for PIA, and even those who had been shortlisted did not bid, it tells you that no one wants to trust the government of Pakistan, whichever government, because they don't know. They will come here, invest money, set up something, and midstream you will change the terms of the agreement. So the first thing to do is to make sure that you keep your word. In sanctity of contracts, that is very important. As I said at the beginning, Pakistan is a resource-rich country. Even if you create the space for Pakistani entrepreneurs, they will come forward. And while I generally say that Pakistani entrepreneurs are mostly shopkeepers who have no agenda beyond 6 months, yet I have come across almost 24 entrepreneurs in Pakistan who are genuinely entrepreneurs, who would take risks, create new opportunities, invest, and get something out positive. They've done it. The problem is that our whole macroeconomic structure is geared to creating a casino economy. It is geared to allow the stock market players and the property market players and the importers to flourish. And import is all about under-invoicing. We've created a macroeconomic infrastructure. We can change that. It can be changed overnight. And once you do that, once you block investment funds going into stock market, going into the property market, which are non-productive investments, because you're not creating any assets, you're not creating any wealth. It's speculation, satyabazi hai. That's how money is made. So then money will, and you create the conditions for industrialization, then investment will flow into industries. When Pakistanis invest, foreigners will also invest. China started its development on the basis of FDI. But the FDI that came into China was in manufacturing for export. The FDI that has come into Pakistan in the last 25 years is all into service industries. All these industries earn their revenues in rupees, convert their profits into dollars and send it out. There is no export. So FDI for Pakistan has become a drain. It is not a positive. It's become a window for outflow of capital, of foreign exchange. We are not earning foreign exchange. So this has to change. The macroeconomic structure has to change. The casino economy has to close. We have to block funds moving into the stock market and the property market, import under invoicing. And these are all doable things. It's not rocket science. Once industrialization starts, in fact, industrialization will increase government revenues. The government will not have to use this, tax structure has become a bhatta structure now because the government is making all kinds of threats to get tax out of us. They won't have to do that because as the industrial base expands, the tax base expands, exports expands, employment expands, and once you have jobs, people will not go into insurgency. If you travel, if you haven't done it, I ask you to go by road from Zob to Peshawar. There is nothing. There is no economic activity. What do you expect those people to do when some terrorist comes and says, here, take this gun, we'll give you 500 rupees a day? This is the only option he has left. I've served in Afghanistan. I can tell you I've served in Afghanistan, but I've also served in Balochistan. The Balochistan insurgency can be over in 1 year.
That's hopeful.
Yeah.
Good.
It's doable. So all these things are doable. And with a country that is so resource rich, one can only be sad that we are in this state of affairs, but it's all doable. We can do it. We can, instead of begging for aid all the time, we can give aid to other countries. The population of India that is on the streets is equal to the population of Pakistan. We can give aid to that street-dwelling population of India.
Got it. So, for Ms. Shah, as a lawmaker, why do you think implementation of our legislation is flawed despite knowing the problems and their respective solutions?
Okay. It's a very important question. Today in the parliament, what is missing is, now this is speaking technically as a legislator. What is missing is post-legislative scrutiny. In the world over, every parliament has committees that actually look at the executive and monitor how the law is being implemented. And some of them even undertake field visits. Say the law on compulsory education, if there is law, is it being implemented in the way it is envisioned in the law? So it's actually the legislators follow this through till the end. In Pakistan, unfortunately, till now, we do not have a provision for post-legislative scrutiny. I have moved it in the, in the parliament. It is under, in some committee. I hope that once that, in the Senate there is, but in the National Assembly, there isn't. So this is one way, of course, that we follow through. This is a gap as far as the parliament is concerned. And of course, the executive, if there is no watch, each of us, there's this whole debate on the 26th amendment. Let me bring it up as well. It is very important that each organ of the state is being watched over by some other organ. Otherwise, there'll be tyranny. So if the executive follows a populist agenda, there is a fear of fascism. If the parliament is a rubber stamp of the executive, then again there is fascism. If the judiciary feels it has the power to dismiss an elected prime minister, then that again is a problem. So we need to have this balance. And so if the executive is not following through a certain legislation, that could be a problem with the legislation, it could be a problem with resources, it could be a problem of the will of the executive. So the legislator has to follow it through. And of course, your judiciary will then have to have the oversight. And one of the reasons why we did the 26th Amendment is to protect the executive from these frequent onslaughts. And there could be a debate on whether, certain provisions may have done differently, but law is a work in progress. So it is important that, there are checks and balances, and each organ of the state is checking the other in a very nuanced way. And so with respect to legislation, it is important that I hope that there has to be a change in the parliamentary rules. For me, there are two very important books. One is the Constitution, and the second is our own Constitution of the Assembly, which is the Rules of Procedure. So if the Rules of Procedure are empowered to allow the Parliament to look at post-legislative scrutiny, we can actually chase the law as well.
Thank you. Next question is for Mr. Raza. What are some innovative methods that can help Pakistan navigate the challenges posed by the global economic shifts and ensure sustainable growth?
So, one of the things that I feel that we essentially lack with our political governments and everything has been that we don't think long term. Unfortunately, with every change in the government, there's a new policy and they keep changing the goalposts every now and then. Interestingly, I was sitting with at one of the meeting with the Chief Minister, Punjab, and there was a bilateral donor that was trying to come up with some programs for education. So the first question I asked them was that I'm sure with every new Chief Minister you come with the same kind of protocol and everything. So I would rather be interested in knowing what has been happening in the past. What has happened to those projects? So they had no answer. And unfortunately, these donors, bilateral, multilateral, whatever projects they bring to Pakistan, there's a donor-driven agenda to them. I mean, it's not really looking at our ground realities. It's coming up with what they want to, sell to Pakistan. So I think we need to have an indigenous model where we need to create what our needs are. And the donors, whatever funding is coming, it has to be long-term and it has to be aligned with what we require. I think that's really where the gap is. So in my experience of working in the development sector, I've always seen that it's always donor-driven and we are not really, we don't really have a say in there. So I think we need to have a self-reliant model. We have to think about what our requirements are, what our needs are, and we need to start dictating those rather than taking that dictation.
Thank you. So I'll give you guys 30 seconds each. Just give your final comments. We can start with Kesar.
मैं उर्दू में कहता हूँ, खामोश बैठेंगे तो फिर जिसके हाथ में बागडोर है वो अपनी मर्ज़ी की चलाएगा. हमें अपनी आवाज़ उठानी है, हमने बगावत करनी है. बगावत का मतलब गाड़ियाँ जलाना और पत्थर मारना सिर्फ नहीं है. बगावत का मतलब सोच से है. जितनी भी तरक्की दुनिया ने की है साइंस में, टेक्नोलॉजी में, मेडिसिन में, इसलिए कि somebody thought this path is not right, there is another way to do it. वो आइडियाज़ से जो बगावत करते हैं वहाँ से तरक्की होती है. हम सबको बगावत करनी पड़ेगी.
नफीसा.
मैंने तो बहुत सारी कंक्लूजन्स पहले ही दे दी थी, लेकिन मैं सिर्फ ये कहूँगी कि आई थिंक एक और डायमेंशन है जो मुझे पहले बात करनी चाहिए थी. वो ये है कि पाकिस्तान अनफॉर्चुनेटली परहैप्स these frequent military interruptions and all that, हमारी सिविल सोसाइटी का स्पेस विच इज़ वो आई एम एड्रेसिंग टुडे इतना श्रिंक हो गया है that वो लेवरेजिंग जो स्टफ है सिटीजनरी का, its power is always articulated by the civil society. So the civil society has to, we all have to develop this common social consciousness. And then this power of association सिर्फ political parties का prerogative नहीं है. मैं नेपाल में गई हूँ, वहाँ farmers association हज़ारों हैं, trade unions हज़ारों हैं. इंडिया में trade unions, farmers associations. पाकिस्तान में membership based organization कौन सी है? Can you think of anyone? वहाँ एक ट्रेड यूनियन की 2-2, 3-3, 4-4 लाख होती हैं, and they are actual trade unions. So I think the power of association is what the Constitution has guaranteed to the citizens. And this power of association need not just be in the political space. It can be in the education space. It could be in the field of AI. It could be the farmers, So I think the power, this is what the citizens have to, ये जो आपने revolution की बात की, I would approach it in a different way, but I would say yes, we need to have citizens associations and pressure groups कि हम जैसे लोग फिर, हम जैसे लोग, which I always say कि politicians, you are a step ahead of us, तो आप फिर हमें, you'll empower us to take those kind of decisions that are in the interest of the people of Pakistan and in the national interest.
Thank you. Ali Raza.
I totally agree with Dr. Bengali Sahab that I think वो जो जिस बगावत की बात करें, that's brewing. And that is precisely why I said I am the optimist who believes that we are in that evolution which is heading in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a great panel and really enjoyed the conversation. I think the way I would frame it is that we need to awaken, right? We need to take responsibility for our country, and we have the power to bring about the shift. Until the people rise up in terms of empowering themselves, change will not happen. It's time for us to wake up as a nation. We've gone through hell and back, and it's now time to find our own strength and own power. Every nation takes time. I think we're coming towards our first 100 years. In 2047, we will be 100 years old. It's time that we rise. We have the potential to be a great nation, and inshallah we will be. Thank you.